uncharted territory for cryptocurrencies as a whole. I love long-term crypto, at least the big players like Bitcoin and Ethereum. But I do think that like this is the dot-com moment for cryptocurrencies, and I don't think that maybe 5%. Yeah, so it's just a huge options expiration. You get multiple, I mean, like it says, triple witching, multiple options expirations in different asset classes. So essentially what you have to look for is weird moves on these type of Fridays, and even the week. The week can be very weird. And then you throw in, we did see weird moves this week, wild swings in the market. After the Federal Reserve announcement, we saw the big pop. Then yesterday, the big drop, and then the futures are up this morning going into the day. So it's really jockeying for position, getting options or underlying contracts to be kind of at levels where institutions want them to be going into expiration. But the bottom line is, for investors, focus on the bigger macro, I think the bigger chart picture, and look to next week already. SPY here, again, we are up about just under 1% or so on the S&P, I think just over 1% on the NASDAQ 100. And basically, I'm still thinking that, whether or not we get a bounce today, and by the way, on options expiration Friday, like today, you can see the futures up early and then they sell off by the end too. So, I mean, we don't really know where things will end out the weekend. But the bottom line is, I still think in the near term, meaning over the next week, we probably have to test this first level. You can see of all the levels along here, this is probably the first one where you start getting a pivot high and then also a little support chop right here. So I would say short term, 358, 359 area. It's not that much further lower. At this level, I think you do get at least multi-day bounce off of it. So again, who knows what today does, but I do think that we ultimately have more downside in the next week. We'll probably tag this level. Now, if we go lower, and eventually I think we do, even if we do get a bounce at the first level, you're looking at this one as being a major level. This is the pre-COVID high on the SPY, and that's at around 337 to 338. From there, I actually think the markets could start to see a sustainable, maybe multi-week bounce, maybe even a month or so. Almost remember what Bitcoin did? Remember this period right here?
Yeah.
That's what I could envision in the equity markets off of that pre-COVID high, where you get multiple months of sideways to slightly up chop. And what that does is, think about the bearishness, right? So going into this period, there was so much bearishness in Bitcoin, and then every pop, you started to convince more and more people, higher highs, higher lows. And it was more of this kind of, wait, maybe we bottom, maybe we, and that's weirdly enough what the market wants you to do. The market wants to get more people long before it flushes them out to the downside. And obviously we know Bitcoin did just that. So that's kind of what I'm envisioning for the S&P 500 off of this level, this pre-COVID level. So the bottom line is, I still think there's more downside in the equity markets, mainly because I think we are heading towards a recession later this year or 2023. Earnings estimates haven't even really come down yet. That's going to impact things as you get these downgrades coming out. And really at this point, the question is, how high does oil stay for how long? How much hurt does that put on retail customers and Americans and really global market participants? And I think weirdly enough, I wouldn't be surprised if interest rates put in a short-term high here. I wouldn't be surprised if the dollar is starting to put in a short-term high, which actually could give us, it could be the recipe why the markets are getting maybe a little bit lower of a move first and then maybe a bounce. And one of the things I was speculating on yesterday was that potentially Bitcoin maybe pierces 20,000, goes to 19.5, 19.2, 19.1, and then you could actually get a decent bounce there as well. And my thesis for that was actually based on the fact that if you look at the 10-year yield, right? So this is the 10-year yield chart, right? And I do follow the 10-year yield because we know the bond market is massive, even compared to the stock market, it's way bigger. And you have to look at this. So you have this trend line that we just tagged this week at 3.5%. And you also have a topping tail on the weekly chart. So topping tails are bearish reversal signals. And again, when it occurs at a short-term high, and honestly, you have to go back quite a ways. I mean, you probably have to go back to here, which is 2011, to see the last time we were above this level on the 10 years. So that's a bearish signal. And we know if yields come in, it usually encourages risk taking because people are making less money in the bond market on interest. And therefore, again, it could be a reason why Bitcoin could get a bounce in this range, this 1920 range. And then also the DXY. Take a look at the DXY chart. There's this weekly channel, and look at where we are on the DXY. And also, again, I don't know if we'll sell today, but you could potentially have a doji here or maybe even a topping tail. But again, if this follows suit, and this channel has been around since 2015, I mean, that's a long time, 7 years inside of this channel where we've just gone up and down and up and down. Maybe the dollar is going to pull back, which we know would be good for gold, silver, and even in some respects, Bitcoin. Maybe it still has to pierce 20,000 because there's a lot of stops there. You have to run those stops and kind of get rid of those people, even though, it's just psychological at this point. But it wouldn't shock me to see a bounce back to 30 after we get to this 20-ish, which we kissed already, or maybe 19-ish area. Markets tend to like threes, right? So 3-bar surges before a chart pauses, things like that. And so what you can see here on the chart of Bitcoin is this was your initial move down. This is your secondary move down, right? And then maybe again, we get that sideways like this, and then you get your final flush out, whether it's to my 12,000 target, maybe it goes below, I'm not sure. But I'm relatively confident that we'll at least go below 20,000. How much lower? I think again, 12,000 could be it, but we would get that 3, 1, 2, kind of 3. And the final third is really the one where people throw up their hands. And I would just say this, is that you have a lot of pain in the crypto markets, but I wouldn't say people are giving up yet on Bitcoin, right? And that's one of the notes that I look for, is like when people finally throw up their hands and say, it's too much pain, I can't take it anymore. That's the bottom. Right now you have, oh my goodness, this is a lot of pain, but I still think it's gonna go up, so I'm gonna buy more, and that's usually not the bottom. So so there's lots of kind of things that are congruent at the 12,000 level. The first one is the measured move, this distance to this distance. If you map that same distance from here down, it gives you 12,000. So that would be that measured move. And then there are a few other things, right? 80 to 85 per correction in Bitcoin historically in its last cycles or its past bear markets. That puts you right around 12,000 as well. And then also, there's even some other things like this pivot right here, right at 12,000. And you can see this one was where we bottomed out in 2019. We had a first move up, pulled back, then it hit again and finally broke out. So that tells you there's a technical level there as well, not just a measured move, not just the 80, 85% correction. And then even to take it one step further here, and this is just, I love just playing around with charts, right? So one of the things that I like to do is what I call parallels, finding a parallel line with another level that matches up. So one of the things here, if we go to parallels, you can see that you draw this line through here, which again, if you extend it down, this has been the line that right here, see these lows? And this is what we just broke recently, right? So you have pivot low here, 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 and here, and then we finally broke it. We'll extend that out more. Let's do an extension out even more. What about with these lows, right? So these lows right from here, 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 and here, and look at where that line is right now. It's kind of right around 12,000. Now, granted, it's going to slow down a little bit below by the time price probably gets there in a month, 2 months, or whatever. But I do think that parallels are very, very powerful in dictating price action where it's going to find support and resistance. So just an interesting thing how this line, again, parallel to here, which is this one parallel there to there. And then again, if you match it up with the next significant pivot area here, you get kind of that same area there. So again, that's the power of parallels. And again, I've started to use these in my trading more and more because I'm finding that they're more and more powerful. They really, and it's amazing because, this line is parallel with this midpoint here, which is parallel with here. And then and in all fairness, I would almost guarantee that at some point in the future, when we rally, you'll have resistance. If you connect here to this parallel, it'll be like resistance up here, wherever that line is at that point. So just very cool stuff with parallels in terms of trading. Historically, from the highs, it's usually around 12 to 18 months, how far into it, so we're getting there. My only issue is that, one of the things that I've been talking about a little bit is that this is the first cycle in Bitcoin, bear cycle, where you have high inflation, right? So starting in 2009, that's when it started. We didn't have high inflation, and this is the first period we do. And then also this is the first period where the Federal Reserve has actually stopped printing and is kind of reversing the printing press, is trying to suck money out. And so you just have to be a little careful here, because it's really uncharted territory for cryptocurrencies as a whole. I love long-term crypto, at least the big players like Bitcoin and Ethereum, but I do think that like this is the .com moment for cryptocurrencies, and I don't think that maybe 5% of cryptos will survive this. But what that also tells me is we have to go lower, because there's still way too many nonsense coins out there that really don't have a big use case. And it's actually a scary period, because I do worry that this is this is uncharted territory, like you're saying, and it could spin us into something much, much worse later this decade. Because again, you get in this cycle of the Fed, when things get bad, politically, the Fed we know is not supposed to be political, but the bottom line is they're humans, they have hearts, they want to help people. So when they see people unemployed, and we know that's one of their mandates, they have to react. So if you start to see a recession and it gets to be a bad recession because of all the liquidity being sucked out and high inflation, if the Fed has to go back to printing of money, it just creates this cycle, and eventually that cycle does collapse. So you either get in Venezuelan type inflation, or you have to have this massive collapse and reset in the economy. And I do worry that the 100-year cycle of the 29 crash and the Great Depression is coming up. And I've said this before, but they always say that every generation has to experience something like that, and it makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like a reset for every generation, and a lot of those people that were in the Great Depression, there's not a lot of them left, unfortunately, to kind of remind us of the pitfalls. I still remember vividly my grandmother. They were relatively wealthy by the time they retired, but she still was into, so careful with money, because she went through that period and remembered that period.